Welcome back to Dick Morris Democracy. My guest, Mike Wilkerson, is a strategic advisor in the business community who spent decades as an emerging markets investor and dealing with mergers and acquisitions. He's a founder of Stonewall Advisors, and he's the author of Why America Matters, the Case for a New Exceptionalism. I'm happy to have Michael join me here today. Welcome.
Hi, Dick. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Michael, unlike Republicans and Democrats within the Uni-Party of years past, Trump is not afraid to stand up for American workers. You recall the old adage, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, for Trump, his big stick is tariffs. Watch.
I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%.
That's why I love Donald Trump. So what do you think of the basic idea about replacing taxes with tariffs?
Well, I think it's has to be part of the overall puzzle. You know, there's been for years talk of, well, we must have free trade. What we need is fair trade. And we've spent the last couple of decades seeing trade that wasn't free, where our trading partners were using currency manipulation, subsidizing their industries, doing all sorts of things, including IP theft and otherwise. So tariffs are for cheaters. Frankly, it's for those who are using sort of underhanded methods to gain an unfair advantage over the U.S. In terms of the ability of tariffs to replace the tax system, you mentioned that we have about $4.5 trillion of taxes raised every year. Half of that comes from individual income taxes. Another third comes from Social Security and Medicare. We have about $3.1 trillion of imports per year. So in order for it to completely replace it, you would have to essentially levy nearly 100% tariff on all goods imported in the U.S. That's probably not realistic, and that's probably not what President Trump has in mind. On the other hand, the ability to shore up our fiscal position with strategic tariffs appropriately used against the right trading partners who are cheating, who are not dealing honestly on a level playing field with the U.S., can absolutely be a benefit, and over time can replace at least a part of both individual income tax and potentially corporate income tax as well.
Well, that's an important distinction, Michael, and I'm glad you were here to make it, between tariffs as a form of punishment or deterrence and tariffs as a regular part of our revenue stream. And I think it's interesting that you say that. Of course, we need to see how tariffs play. Once we impose them, we need to see what goes on. But you got to admit that the pathetic nature of the Chinese response to Trump's tariffs certainly says, bring them on, bring on more. We won't do anything.
Dick, we run about $1 trillion trade deficit a year. And when Trump came into office in his first year as he was dealing with this, China represented nearly half of that $1 trillion trade deficit. Today, it sits at just over a quarter. So a lot of progress has been made. The Biden administration maintained a lot of Trump's tariffs and trade policies with regard to China. There's no doubt that they were the biggest abuser of the system. And there is a place in dealing with, as you said, both in terms of making sure that others are dealing fairly, but also as part of the ordinary course, that tariffs absolutely have a role. And I believe that the response that China displayed was much weaker than what was feared. And that's because we're dealing with a trading partner that needs us, that needs our consumer market as much or more than we need them. There is definitely room to take a tougher line here with China, as President Trump did and as he has committed to do again.
You know, it may not be true that tariffs can replace taxes, but it probably is true that they can do a lot to replace armies and invasions. Because when Trump wants to ratchet up pressure on a foreign country, he does it with tariffs, not invasion. And it really is a very peaceful way of getting your way and getting your point across.
That's absolutely right, Dick. And you raised an important point, which is, we talk about the $4.5 trillion of taxes, but unfortunately, that's not enough to cover the government spending, which runs about $6.5 trillion. So we've been running during the Biden administration around $2 trillion a year in deficit. That's money we don't have, money which the government prints new debt in order to cover. So a lot of that, to your point, does go to defense and military spending in places like Ukraine and places around the world. And trade is another form of diplomacy, just as war's military actions are. We need to be smarter about how we use geoeconomic policy, how we use trade as one of the ways to deal with our adversaries and partners around the globe.
When you combine the impact of trade with the impact of American oil dominance, which Trump has set as its goal, you're giving the president a toolkit to avoid war and to enforce economic justice. And that's just a major development. And I think Trump deserves a vast amount of credit for spotting that.
Dick, there's no such thing as an energy poor, rich country. America was blessed with abundant natural resources, oil and gas, coal, nuclear power. And the unfortunate aspect of the Biden administration, the Biden regime, has been to hamstring those natural resources. Well, over time, that is impoverishing our nation. And one of the best things about the Trump administration was that he really unleashed that domestic productive capability, fracking, other new technologies that really enabled us to become energy independent for the first time in decades. We've lost ground over the last 4 years, and it is absolutely important to our economic health to bring down inflation and everything else that we get our domestic energy productive capacity up and moving again, freed of the regulatory red tape that has absolutely stymied it over the past 3 to 4 years.
And we stopped thinking that that's evil. Yeah.
And stop thinking ideologically.
You may recall during the infamous Trump-Harris debate from a few weeks ago, Kamala made the foolish mistake of trying to attack Trump on putting tariffs on foreign imports. Thankfully, there are still intelligent economists who can translate political spin. Watch.
You know how I feel about tariffs? It's a bargaining chip. And many of the tariffs with China are still on. Once again, the moderators don't drill down on the two aspects of tariffs, but they do drill down on other areas that make no economic sense whatsoever. Maybe they don't feel the pain of what's going on, but I feel bad that they can't buy houses and insurance. Why don't we talk about it? Why don't we talk about it?
Well, then there's other issues around climate issues and other things that are affecting things in Florida.
What issues did you learn last night? The ABC people were like a turkey shoot.
Wow. It's a good thing he doesn't sell admission. I'd go broke buying tickets. But I think that lost in the campaign rhetoric is the originality and creativity of Trump's ideas. When Woodrow Wilson faced the conundrum of how do you push American values without getting into a war, he hit on the solution of collective security that led to the League of Nations unsuccessfully, but then the UN more successfully. Now Trump has hit on the idea of oil dominance and tariffs. And those are really tremendous cudgels for making the rest of the world do good things that they otherwise would refuse to do.
Well, the Biden administration has focused on one of the tools, which is economic sanctions, and that has turned out to have backfired, to have boomeranged on the administration completely, because it's accelerated a process of de-dollarization. Some of these nations trying to get away from the U.S. dollar system, setting up their alternatives. To your point, trade, tariffs, these are tools. These are economic tools, somewhere between hard power and soft power.
Yeah.
Also, in the 1920s and 30s, we used a cultural influence that's been lost today. You mentioned cudgel. Well, the cudgel really has been military intervention and economic sanctions.
Which
trade is a better
wants.
way to go.
Yeah. Coming up, remember all those stories about people scamming to get pandemic relief funds? Well, now those very same people who cheated the system are getting scammed themselves. I'll have that story coming up next. It's delicious.